So I'm pleased to introduce Santiago Walliser. We're working together with LeanFS as a consulting company. I was just thinking that we often use the term digital natives. I think there's probably the next term, which is AI natives. So I would classify LeanFS to be AI natives. Santiago and partners, they have been pretty much focusing on making AI work. He's, as we just chatted, about to conclude his PhD, but he's not getting to it because he's implementing too much. So that's exactly what you guys want to know. So I'll hand it over to Santiago for his presentation and take us through some real-life usage examples, please.
Hi. So, wealth management. Wealth management is about trust, clarity, and lasting relationships. Yet, every day, the same tasks keep popping up, like having to write a compliance report or having to monitor a portfolio, general administrative work. We're just overflooded with all these administrative tasks. But AI agents are here to step in to help us gain more time so that we can focus on client relationships. Furthermore, they help us focus on to put the energy into what really counts, building trust with clients. So AI agents clear the way and remove all the routines that we have on a daily basis. And they help us to build strong client relationships. So one may say AI agents are powerful assistants for all jobs, right? They never sleep, they cost a fraction, they don't complain, they always answer when we ask them. Sounds great, right? So let me tell you a story real quick. So this is John. John is he doesn't look like this, by the way, and it's not his name, it's AI generated. He's a client of ours, and a friend nowadays. And John has the same problem as everyone, I think, in his room, just too much work, right? And I told him about the AI agents a few months ago, and we met, and we started to speak about how they help. I explained the things we have been building, like having one that does monthly portfolio reports, client portfolio narrative creation, things like these. And John really liked the idea. And suddenly, he looked at me with big eyes and said, hey, I have a big idea. You know what? I have this big issue. I have so many clients all over the world which have these luxurious assets. He mentioned horses to price. He mentioned wine cellars to price. All these luxurious assets that he had to price every time regularly and for all different clients. And that cost a lot of time. So his idea was, you know what? Why don't I use the AI agents? And his vision was that he would be able to upload everything to the AI system, the AI with the crown, and it would just give him back an Excel file with all the prices of all these luxurious assets. In one column, you have the luxurious description of the product, and in the other one, the price. Unfortunately, reality looks like this. If you ask the model to price it, for example, a private jet, you'll get a paper plane back, metaphorically speaking. And also, it doesn't look as inviting as the other one. So the question arises, why did John do this mistake? Pretty simple. For the first time in technology, we have agents that are able to speak to us. We can speak in our language with them. No longer drag and drop, no longer clicks. We just have something we can interact with. And that leads to us thinking about AI as a human. It knows so much, it can do so much. As a consequence, we start humanizing it. And reality is that 95% of Gen AI pilots fail. And this is according to a study conducted by MIT recently. And reason why? Because vision runs ahead of understanding. People do not understand how AI works, do not have clear approaches how to work with it, do not have a structure, a strategy. So if we look back at this sentence, I guess the all jobs is wrong, right? It's good for the right jobs. And today I'm here to explain you what the right jobs are, in our opinion, and to give you an overview of how to define the right jobs. With this, we understand in the end how hard it is to spot the right job for AI and make it work in practice. My name is Santiago Walliser. I'm from Lean Financial Solutions, short LeanFS, and we built this. We have on one hand, we do consulting businesses, as was mentioned before, and on the other side, we have our own product, Portfolio Chat AI. And what it allows is wealth managers, relationship managers, asset managers to just chat with their portfolio. We pull real portfolio data in, we pull news, filings, earning transcripts, and co., and have automated workflows as well as a chat, all based on different AI agents. As a company, just real quick maybe, we help companies in the end actually transition over and introducing AI into the organizations. And as a consequence, we also have the feeling and the know-how how to actually introduce AI into companies, besides the product that I will use today as a foundation for my explanations. The 3 principles that we have distilled for this presentation, or actually a few weeks ago for another presentation, we sat down and we started to think about all the learnings that we had, because building such solutions is really hard. We learned the hard way, really. It took us a few months, actually years, to actually conclude and find out how we can bring AI solutions into portfolio context with news and everything into it. We analyzed how we approach client projects, we analyzed how we built our software, and came up with these 3 principles: trust, integration, and value. When it comes to trust, we believe, that understanding AI is the main principle that helps us to build trust. Then grounding. Grounding means to anchor answers in facts, such that we know if the model is lying or not. And control, to have clear user controls about what the users are allowed to do with the AI or not. So real quick, I think most people know this in this room, but AI has learned patterns, right? And it has learned how to predict words. So if we have this sentence, if the portfolio is all encrypted, the journey is, well, smooth. It starts to assign a probability to it. 2%, well, I guess so, right? What about long term? Even lower, 1%. So what about roller coaster? Now we're talking 32%, and I guess it would be bumpy, 60%. And the model then understands, okay, I have to predict, the word I predict is bumpy with 60%. Simply speaking, the model does the same things as we do. It reads the question that we ask, the prompt, it tries to understand the context, it starts thinking about it, and it starts answering. How does this process look like? So when an AI model is trained, it is trained on a large corpus, a lot of data, right? And it embeds this information in a highly dimensional space. And just to simplify it, imagine the highly dimensional space being the Alps. On the lower bottom, we have the information, or actually the whole landscape is a landscape of answers. And the lower bottom in the valley, we have areas, given the prompt we have asked, areas where we don't have enough information. So when we ask a question, it lands somewhere in the landscape. And it wouldn't want to go down to the valley because it doesn't have enough information. Its goal is to go up to the peak. So what it does, it tries to understand the patterns and follows it. And what happens is he lands. Let's see if the animation works. Yep. So what happens is he goes up the Alps and he reaches the top. The top, the peak, is the answer, is the area where the most likeliest, where the highest probability answer lays. This is the answer that we can get. So we have this read, think, and answer approach. However, now imagine that we ask a question where the model has no information at all. For example, give me the value of a private jet, a Gulfstream G650 from 2012 that was traded last week in Geneva off markets. Nobody would know, I guess, in this room. So what happens if we ask the model the question? He doesn't know either. What's going to happen is we are somewhere in the Sahara, next to the sea in northern Egypt, and we land somewhere there, between dunes. And as we see, the peak is a sand dune. So the process is going to be pretty short until he finds an answer. And what we call this is perplexity. If I ask someone a question and he doesn't know, and he's just perplexed. So perplexity is the same thing here in AI models. We can control perplexity or measure it, and based on it define if we say, I don't know, as AI model, or maybe he slips off and he starts guessing, and then we get something that's wrong, a so-called hallucination. So the question is, how do we stay off the dunes and get to the peaks? Pretty basically spoken and explained. Two things. We have to have good prompts, instructive prompts with enough context, good questions. We have an assistant that doesn't know what we want. We have to explain it. Furthermore, we have to assess. We have to give them the access to knowledge. That means that we want factual answers that we can trust. And this leads us to grounding the answers. So the question comes up, how do we make sure that the model is anchored in such a way that when we get answers, we are sure that they are somehow correct, or we can understand from where it comes from? The process is pretty simple. We connect data to the AI model. We give them access to different sources. We then search, and we then cite. Just to go real quick over it, we can connect different sources, as you for sure know, like ChatGPT has the World Wide Web. We can add files, our own folders with files. We can add databases he can access to. We can add our own business softwares through APIs. In the next step, the AI agent goes and searches this information, given a prompt, and then he searches for the right fragments, the right data text passages that fit what we're looking for. And here the magic happens when we ground, because before I was looking in the Alps, searching for the right answer. Now, he just receives, he goes and gathers the fragments he needs, and everything is laid in front of his doorstep. So he no longer has to find the right solution somewhere in his own memory. He has the fragments that potentially have the answer in front of him. And based on that, he can synthesize an answer and give it back to us. And when we get the answer, we can actually understand from where he got the information, which gives us trust in the end. Control is great because we maybe have a huge folder with a lot of files, a huge SharePoint, and we wouldn't want that everybody can access every file, right? So we have to have user controllers access to control the user accesses. Pardon me. We have to train the users to understand how they have to prompt. We have to have clear rules for what can you use the AI, for what not. And we need strong guardrails. Guardrails in AI are just mechanisms that make sure that if the user is doing something he shouldn't do, they tell him, you shouldn't do that, simply speaking. So trust is earned by making sure everybody in your organization understands, that we make sure that we ground our answers by adding data, and that we have clear controls. Then we get to the next step, integration. Integration has 3 steps. We have to identify what we actually want to integrate, when we have to embed it in a smart way, and we have to oversee what is happening in the end. So I think in these terms, AI tools in general, like ChatGPT, are great horizontal helpers. But when it comes to the part where magic happens, we have to go into the vertical depth of the process. So if you look at our organization, horizontal helpers are great for example, writing emails, improving how we write a summary. Vertical depth is not achieved that fast. But the thing I always have when I speak to management at different companies is that they say, if we want to use AI, really, but we just don't know where. I'm waiting for for people in my business at the front lines to give me actual use cases. And then the thing is that the people themselves have no understanding of AI neither. So how should they come up with their own use cases? And what we see is the best way is to actually teach the basics. Really sit down with the people, analyze which AI tool, a generic AI tool, helps them in their daily workflow to get files, to get their processes, and really train them in small groups that they understand it. Next, you let them apply them it daily, such that they come up and experiment with their own ideas. And suddenly, you will have so many use cases coming up if you collect them correctly. Then the question arises, okay, which kinds of use cases will come up? Pretty simply speaking, we have the horizontal support, the emails, the summaries, and co. Which is, if you have a value axis, the one with the lowest value. Then we have the so-called forced workarounds. If we think about wealth management or portfolio management, We might want to understand a client's portfolio better. What were the drivers? We want to explain them if the market was picking up, or if there was a sector that helped him, or a single stock. What was it? Did I pick correctly? So what you do in the end is probably, at the moment, you go to Bloomberg or whatever, to your BMS first, portfolio management system, you download the holdings of the client, then you go to Bloomberg, download returns, then you go to Excel, you do your calculations, you get a nice file in the end, then you have some charts, and maybe at that point you think, you know what, I put this into AI, and the AI helps me then to analyze it better, see some things I might not have seen, and the whole thing is just, yeah, nitty-gritty Excel work with error-prone processes and time-consuming work. So what about if we master the vertical integration? All these steps, we just give it AI agents. So this is the thought process that should happen when it comes to adopting use cases. Classifying them and understanding how to, where they belong to. Coming back to the example I just said, I explain. When we talk about AI agents, not the other agents, AI agents, we speak about an orchestrator. He's the one that speaks to us. He's the one that answers us. But he is also the one, if we ask a question, who starts to predict what is the best way, what are the steps that I have to take in order to answer my user. He then has sub-agents. For example, there's an agent called portfolios. That sub-agent's only task is he has different tools he can use. Tools are connections to databases or whatever, and we can get, for example, portfolio holdings. We can get the benchmark of a portfolio. We can get the returns. Then we might have an analytics agent. He can compute stuff, risk measures, attributions, the top movers, stuff like that. But here's the thing, the orchestrator, if we ask, give me an attribution analysis of my portfolio XYZ, really in plain text without selecting anything, he goes, checks the portfolios that you have, checks the names, finds the suitable one, gets the holdings, and that sub-agent brings it back to the orchestrator, and the orchestrator then sees, oh, okay, I found the portfolio and I have the holdings. Next, it seems like the user wants that I compute some attributions. So maybe I need some returns. He goes to portfolio agent again. He pulls the returns. The orchestrator suddenly has the portfolio holdings and the returns. Then he goes to the analytics agents, who needs the returns, for example, to compute risk measures. Next, news agents. So we, for example, have earning transcripts, filings, news, everything embedded in different agents. One of them is the news agent. Simply speaking, it looks like this. We can tell him, for Novartis, for example, give me the news. What happened in the last 10 days, last 30 days, 6 months? What were the drivers? What's going on? We can start to connect these different things. Suddenly we understand what the top movers are. If I ask what are the top movers of my portfolio, it gets it. And then at that point, up to here, I would just have a table with the best returns. And then we can go a step further. What if I get for the top 3, for example, suddenly the key return drivers based on the news, and I can explain then what happened. And what's different and really important is really we're not going into this landscape memory of the LLM. We're going into the world where we are getting news that are relevant by searching for the date, by stuff that is not probabilistic. And we pull it out. We have some classifications that help us really classify the news fragments themselves, and we lay it in front of the doorstep. He just has to synthesize and think, what is now what I have to answer? Lastly, everything is pretty nice if you have workflows and chat or whatever, but what you lastly want is something you can use with your team or with your clients. So what about creating a report agent? One that helps me push my marketing by creating newsletters every morning, nice PDFs. I just have to put into my system and send it out as a newsletter. Or I have a meeting with a client. I get a meeting brief about what happened in his portfolio in the last 6 months, and so on. There are too many use cases, but what I want that you understand is how everything is structured and how you can connect different things, and there are endless opportunities in the end, of things that you can do. And reports, they don't have to be standard reports. You can create them dynamically. It selects its own charts. It creates its own tables. And you put your branding on it, your colors, and so on, and you get something that's neatly looking in your style. Here an example of the chat interface of where we are speaking with one orchestrator agent that in the background has multiple agents. What are my biggest positions in my portfolio? He understands I'm talking about the Swiss equities portfolio because before I was talking about that in the chat. And I see here, for example, that Roche in this rather small portfolio has 27,000 Swiss francs invested in it. We see here also how much the top 3 positions are approximately, 64.7%. All these numbers that you see here are not calculated by probability or somehow he tries to compute them. They are pulled from a system that calculates everything. So the numbers that we see here are completely correct. If you go for news, so what was the performance of my Novartis position, its contribution to my portfolio, and the latest news around it. Remember when I told you that we can plug and cite sources? Here we see exactly the sources that he was using to answer now the question. We see the news he was pulling and so on, and we get at the bottom a nice summarizing text, including here, for example, the sources that we use to answer that. So if we build such agents, it's really important that we have control. And control comes in order to have oversight. We need to understand the costs. We need to understand who is using what. We need to understand the models that are being used, because potentially we have different LLM models and they're differently strong. Perhaps we start testing which one is the best one. We get feedback from the users, thumbs up, thumbs down. We have the different tools. The tools are these functions I mentioned before. Get the portfolio data, write a report. Which are the most used ones? Which are the ones that fail the most often if we want to control things? Data, which data is being called? Trails, clear trails, super important for audit trails. We need, for compliance reasons, we need to understand if when a user logs in, every single step he does in a chat and what's happening in the background. So all of that is important to have clear oversight. So when it comes to integration, to summarize it real quick, identify the work, the different use cases that you have, embed one of them, and oversee it. But the question is, which one shall I embed? This is where value comes up. Here we start prioritizing use cases. We start then building the most promising ones, and we build it in such a way that we can pilot even faster later on. So there are many ways to prioritize stuff. I'm sure you all know many of them. When it comes to AI, for example, you can look at how many hours per day would I save? What's the quality uplift? Do I have less errors maybe? If I have this Excel warfight every time I need to do an attribution analysis, am I better off using this? What's the strategic fit? Are we going now more into client connection, marketing, stuff like that, or are we trying to improve how we invest? Which use cases shall we look at? And the data, how is the data looking? It doesn't matter with AI agents if it's distributed all across your company, because you can just call what you need, the agent goes. But the data has to be there, and it has to be clean. So in our philosophy, we have this philosophy that we say we build a foundation that we can use then to scale. That means the traditional data scientist is no longer as useful as he was before. He's great at preparing the data, at evaluating stuff, at running some small pilots, but the stuff he uses is not the stuff that's scalable later on, and we want to have something that scales. So it's great to get some initial ideas, some feelings, but in the end, we need experience in today's world. We need someone that has gone through this war, in quotes, of building such a platform, knowing how to stream text, learning how the system stays connected in a browser, things like these. Next, we need alignment with business. We need an owner that is a project owner that really understands what the business wants, which steps do they have in the process, and translates them over to the techie guys, and vice versa. Otherwise, it's going to be a mess because we're really trying to connect or embed workflows, processes of multiple dimensions into agents. So we have to understand what exists and what is used, what data, etc. Lastly, once we found a few suiting workflows, we build a foundation that is scalable. At that point, we say, bye-bye pilots, bye-bye use case ideas. Now we build something that scales. When we have a scalable platform, we can really accelerate the way we go with use cases or with ideas that we have. For example, portfolio chat AI. We have no client data in it. But suddenly we got the question once, I have a client relationship management tool with client information. And I would love to have that in my system, to have reports that are more, for example, more personal. For example, hi, John. I hope you're doing fine. I hope your child that was born a few months ago is happily alive. Whatever you want. And then the portfolio report. Maybe something that's a little bit more emotional at that point. And what we can do is then, if we have this client relationship management tool and we call it through an API, we get some data, and that data we can see as text. And what about the idea now we use that output we get directly from an API, and we integrate it into a prompt that is, write a report for XYZ. Here you have the portfolio information, and now also include some personal elements based on the news, on the summary that we have from the client relationship management tool. That allows us then to test stuff much faster because we're using prompts. We can see if stuff works, if people are happy, and we can then start to integrate and build the APIs that we have. Lastly, we have value from clear direction. And to summarize, we have trust, integration, and value, where we clearly see the principles that we have to follow in order to build foundations that work. And we build Portfolio Chat exactly for that, to help, for example, wealth managers and co. to have these agents in a platform or through a chat in another platform to just adopt them really fast. Lastly, AI agents are scaling fast. Not adopting them means losing ground. A pretty aggressive headline, but actually it's reality. The other day, I met, for example, Roland Brack. He's from brack.ch. He built this web shop. You probably know him from Switzerland when it comes to computers and co. And he also emphasized the importance of AI agents. And if you do not adapt them nowadays, or AI in general, in a smart way, you're just going to lose. Lose in the sense that you're just slower than the competitors. Others bring out newsletters, are more personalized, are just faster in analyzing reports, creating reports, and so on. So it's not that far off. Stuff is scaling. We have a solution that works. The future is not as far away as we think. So most importantly, and to finalize my presentations, AI agents assist us so we can focus on what truly matters. In my opinion, we get more time. We can focus more on human connections at that point. And with that, thank you very much for your attention. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Santiago. I'll have a question which I think will lead over into the product section. If I understood you correctly, the key to successful implementation of AI agents is really to have the context and the flow clear and the data set that is clear. And I think you were basically showing a lot of these examples where if you start on a greenfield, it kind of gets really hard because you need to have your content repository, you need to have your entitled users, you need to have the business context, etc. What do you see in your projects? Like when you start a consulting project, you start with this pitch, you explain it, you then dive into the deep end. What does it typically look like in most organizations?
Well, I can tell you an example of a larger architectural company that we're working with. They wanted to have this knowledge hub in order for the users or for the architects to ask information about past projects. And they were evaluating if they should use a co-pilot solution that is just really, it doesn't allow you to do in the long term many things, so you're rather better off building such a platform where you have a strong infrastructure that you can then do mobile applications, whatever. And the thing is there, when I explained it to them, the idea popped up, okay, great. Let's start with analyzing architectural plans. The most complicated thing is a picture, you have text on it, and then the thing is you really have to stop them and make them realize, let's start with the basics, like introducing process documentation and producing information from your ERP systems, things like these, and you guide them through. So they sometimes, once they understand it, they want to grab the stars, but you have to stop them and go for the basics to have the quick wins and then build on top of that. So that is what we see at the moment.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. And I think that leads me into the next presentation, so thank you.
I have a question.
Oh, you, Franz, go ahead, but wait, we've got the, you want to catch or something? No, I'll make it the safe way, huh?
Now the difficult question comes.
No. Two questions, actually. Hopefully short ones. So first one, we also have already since 1 year a use case in production, customer facing, really simple one. We use the contracts of agents and generated personalized FAQs, because contracts can be quite difficult to read, and we used like this horizontal layer to summarize and to make your own what's covered or not. And we found out that, of course, different models are better suited or not, so we locked in one model. How much effort is it so when does it make sense to switch to a new model? And you need to retest the whole thing, right? So everything that was working suddenly might not be working anymore. So this costs, again, a lot of energy. And the second question is, how do you test, ideally, AI agents, for example, or in conversational? How do you test it automatically?
Okay, that are two really good questions. When it comes, I can talk about a finance case. When we asked an AI model, for example, explain me the narrative why this portfolio increased, then we can say, well, clearly this is stock XYZ and it increased 20%, the others stayed flat, and that's why your portfolio increased XYZ, okay? Having these processes allows us now to build a test data set, right? So you have two columns, the input and the output. And then you give it to an agent, an AI model, and you give him the question or the task, give me an answer to that. Ideally, you can quantify it somehow. So what you start is you tell him, ask him 5 times that question. You get 5 different responses. Then you have something called LLMs as judges that start analyzing, comparing the answers, the 5 answers, to the real answer that you wrote down. And then you give it scores from 1 to 5, how good is it? The more judges you have, the better you approach the optimal average, right? The real average. And then, based on that, you can then evaluate if it's good or not. Then, taking that process further, now you can ask the same thing to all different agents, all different models. One important thing is, if you want to have systems that work long-term with agents, different AI platforms, you have to be sure that your prompts are in such a way that the answers you get are always clearly structured. In a chat, you're free to go. But if you want an FAQ, you always need a question and an answer, for example. So you can have structured outputs and things like this if that is something. But you have to be really sure that you nail the prompts, that no matter what model you take, even the dumbest of 2 years ago, it gives you an answer that looks correct, right? And now you're moving in the way of evaluating AI models, evaluating use cases. Because imagine an Excel file, you just have, in the background, you have all these agents doing all this stuff, you get scores, and you get now your use case, your real answer, and then you get numeric scores for every different model, an average, based on multiple dimensions. You can have multiple columns. And then you can start ranking, understanding which model is better or not. It allows you also to see if models start to drift, because even if you use GPT-5, for example, some days it's dumber than Gemini, and other days it's smarter. And we think it's because they scale the GPUs in the background. So things like these allow you, ideally you have the time to go once and put the effort into it, and then you just build a dashboard where you can track stuff, and if something slips off, you get a reminder or so, or notification. Hope that answers it.
Cool.
Yeah, sure.
So I can see this could be going on for a while here. But the thing that gets me excited to carry on from that last statement that you made is to now go over into the product side of the house. There is a number of things that Selina and David are going to show us, which were innovations that we've done within the product. But I think one key element that you were alluding to is the more actual structured content you have, to then put a model or a flow or a set of agents on top, you have a much higher chance of success if you have a contained environment. And what excites me is that we saw a lot of use cases from our customers that already now have Unblue in use, that have a very structured way of having a client conversation, having the context to the client, having the metadata, having the racks, having the repositories of the correct information, and now putting agents on top of that will become a very high probability of success. And that's what excites us, and you'll see some of that in the upcoming presentations from the product management and the engineering team. So thank you so much for your presentation and insight, Santiago. Round of applause.